The boardroom felt like a cathedral of glass and steel, suspended 40 stories above Manhattan. Eleanor Pierce stood at the head of the marble table, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the presentation remote. 10 years of architectural work, her designs, her vision, her soul, were about to be unveiled to the most important client her firm had ever pursued. "Ladies and gentlemen," her husband Daniel began, stepping forward with the easy confidence that had always made her feel both proud and slightly diminished. "Thank you for giving Pierce and Associates this opportunity. What you're about to see represents the future of sustainable urban development." Eleanor's breath caught. Pierce and Associates. The firm was called Hartwell Pierce Design, her maiden name first, because she'd been the lead architect when they founded it 7 years ago. But Daniel had a way of reshaping reality with his words, so smoothly that you almost believed his version. She clicked to the first slide. Her design for the Meridian Green complex filled the screen. Revolutionary mixed-use development that would transform a decaying industrial waterfront into a living, breathing ecosystem. Vertical gardens cascaded down glass facades. Solar arrays bloomed like mechanical flowers. Every detail had consumed her for 18 months. "The structural innovation here is remarkable," Daniel continued, gesturing to her cross-section drawings. "As you can see, We've incorporated," Eleanor corrected softly. Daniel's smile never wavered, but his eyes flashed a warning. "Of course. The team has incorporated bioadaptive ventilation systems that reduce energy consumption by 63%. Around the table, the executives from Consolidated Global Properties leaned forward, impressed. Eleanor recognized the CEO, James Whitmore, a silver-haired man whose real estate empire had reshaped 3 continents. Beside him sat a younger woman in an immaculate charcoal suit, watching with unusual intensity. Eleanor advanced through the slides, explaining load distributions, environmental impact assessments, community integration plans. She'd rehearsed this presentation dozens of times, but Daniel kept inserting himself, his voice drowning hers out, his hand reaching over to take the remote. "If I may," he said, not waiting for permission, clicking to the financial projections. "The return on investment timeline is aggressive but achievable. My background in commercial development has been crucial in making this not just architecturally stunning, but economically viable." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. His background in commercial development consisted of 3 years at a mid-tier firm before she'd brought him into her practice. The economic model had been crafted by her and their analyst, Marcus, over hundreds of late nights while Daniel attended networking events and golf tournaments. "The design philosophy," Daniel continued, warming to his subject, "is something I've been developing for years. This concept of biomimetic integration. That's from my thesis," Eleanor heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, underwater. "My graduate thesis at Columbia. Which we've built upon together," Daniel said smoothly, that smile again, the one that told her to stop making things awkward in front of important people. "Marriage is a partnership, after all. Your technical skills and my vision make quite the team." The woman in the charcoal suit leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes fixed on Eleanor with an expression that might have been recognition or pity or something else entirely. Eleanor felt the room tilting. How many times had this happened? How many presentations, meetings, conferences where her work had been slowly, methodically absorbed into the gravitational field of Daniel's narrative? She thought of the architectural journals that had profiled visionary developer Daniel Pierce, with only passing mentions of his wife. She remembered the industry awards where he'd given speeches that began with "I'd like to thank my wife for her support," as if she'd been making him sandwiches instead of designing award-winning structures. "Mr. Pierce," James Whitmore said, his voice cutting through Eleanor's spiral. "This is impressive work. However, before we proceed, I'd like to hear more about the architectural philosophy directly from Mrs. Pierce. The technical specifications you've shown suggest a level of detail that interests me." Daniel's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Though Eleanor's expertise is more in the drafting phase. The conceptual vision and client relations are I developed every aspect of this design," Eleanor said. The words came out stronger than she'd expected, surprising even herself. From initial concept through structural engineering, the biomimetic integration isn't built upon my thesis. It is my thesis, applied at commercial scale. The vertical garden systems use a proprietary irrigation design I patented 2 years ago. The solar array configuration is based on the Fibonacci sequence, which I've been researching since my fellowship in Copenhagen. The room had gone very quiet. Daniel laughed, that careful, social laugh he used to defuse tension. Darling, I think the stress of this presentation is getting to you. We've discussed this. You're brilliant with the technical aspects, but let's not. Let's not what? Eleanor heard herself ask. Tell the truth. Eleanor. Daniel's voice had taken on a warning edge that she knew well. The edge that appeared when she contradicted him at dinner parties, when she questioned his decisions about her firm, when she failed to play her assigned role in the performance of their marriage. Perhaps you should take a moment. Get some water. Something shattered inside Eleanor then. Not dramatically, not with noise or heat, but with the quiet finality of ice cracking on a spring morning. No, she said simply. No, I don't need water. I need to tell these people the truth about who designed the Meridian Green complex. The woman in the charcoal suit was smiling now, a small, knowing smile that made Eleanor's skin prickle with sudden awareness. Mrs. Pierce, James Whitmore said carefully, perhaps you should continue the presentation. But before Eleanor could respond, the woman in charcoal stood, her movement fluid and purposeful. If I may interrupt, she said, her voice carrying an accent Eleanor couldn't quite place. European, educated, expensive. I believe there's something everyone in this room should see. 6 hours earlier, Eleanor had woken at dawn, as she always did, to the sound of Daniel's breathing beside her in their Tribeca loft. For a moment, before full consciousness returned, she'd felt peaceful. Then she remembered the presentation, and her stomach had clenched with familiar anxiety. She'd slipped out of bed quietly, padding to the kitchen in bare feet. The loft was Daniel's aesthetic vision. All exposed brick and industrial chic, more showroom than home. Eleanor missed color, softness, the chaotic warmth of the rent-controlled apartment she'd lived in during grad school, where she'd drafting table had been wedged between the refrigerator and a window overlooking a fire escape. The presentation boards were laid out on the dining table like an altar. Eleanor had spent the previous night checking and rechecking every detail, knowing that Daniel would review her work before the meeting, finding ways to streamline her explanations to make them more client-friendly. You're up early. She turned to find Daniel in the doorway, already dressed in one of his bespoke suits. At 43, he was still handsome in that generic executive way, carefully maintained, gym-sculpted, with distinguished gray just beginning at his temples. She'd met him 11 years ago at an industry conference, had been flattered by his attention, his insistence that she was the most talented architect he'd ever encountered. Couldn't sleep, Eleanor admitted. This project means everything. I know. Daniel poured himself coffee, not offering her any. Which is why we need to present a united front. No fumbling, no over-explaining technical details that will bore them. I'll handle the vision, you back me up with the specs. Simple. Eleanor felt the familiar weight settling on her chest. Daniel, these are my designs. I should be leading. We've been over this. His voice had that patient, condescending tone he used when explaining obvious things to someone too naive to understand. You're brilliant, Eleanor. No one disputes that. But you don't understand how these people think. Whitmore isn't buying architecture, he's buying confidence, vision, leadership. He needs to see strength. And I'm not strong? You're technical. There's a difference. Daniel set down his coffee mug with careful precision. Look, we both know how this industry works. Fair or not, men like Whitmore respond to men like me. We use that to our advantage, land the contract, and then you can do what you do best, design beautiful buildings. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what you want? How many times had Daniel asked her that question, always when guiding her away from what she actually wanted toward what served him? Eleanor thought about objecting, about insisting on her right to present her own work. But she was tired and the presentation was in 6 hours, and maybe Daniel was right. Maybe she was being precious about credit when what mattered was winning the contract. Okay, she heard herself say. Daniel smiled, kissed her forehead like she was a child who'd finally understood a difficult lesson. That's my girl. We're a team, remember? What benefits the firm benefits both of us. But as Eleanor watched him leave for an early meeting with their financial advisor, she wondered when the firm had stopped being hers and become theirs, and when theirs had quietly become his. The woman who would change everything appeared at 1:47 p.m., 17 minutes before the presentation was scheduled to begin. Eleanor had been arranging her materials in the conference room, double-checking the projector setup, when the assistant showed the Consolidated Global Properties team to their seats. She recognized James Whitmore immediately, impossible not to, given that his face appeared regularly in the Financial Times. But it was the woman beside him who stopped Eleanor mid-thought. She was perhaps 50, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of bone structure that suggested Eastern European aristocracy. Her suit probably cost more than Eleanor's car. But it was her eyes that held Eleanor's attention, dark, assessing, intelligent in a way that felt both uncomfortable and oddly reassuring. "Mrs. Pierce," Whitmore said, extending his hand. "Thank you for hosting us. This is Dr. Katerina Volkov, our senior architectural consultant. She'll be evaluating the technical aspects of your proposal." Eleanor shook the woman's hand, felt the cool firmness of her grip. "Dr. Volkov," Eleanor said, "I've read your work on sustainable urban design. Your Prague project was revolutionary." Something flickered in Katerina's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of something Eleanor didn't yet understand. "You're familiar with my work? I wrote my master's thesis on adaptive reuse of industrial spaces. Your conversion of the Smicha factories was a major case study." "Most architects your husband's age aren't familiar with that project," Katerina said carefully. "I'm not my husband's age. I'm 36. "Ah." Katerina's smile was enigmatic. "Then you were quite young when you founded Hartwell Pierce Design." 29. Fresh out of Columbia's graduate program, Eleanor felt herself relaxing slightly, grateful to be discussing her work rather than performing in Daniel's shadow. "I'd done my thesis on transforming post-industrial sites into living systems, and I wanted to put theory into practice." "Ambitious," Katerina observed. "And your husband? Was he part of this founding vision?" The question felt loaded somehow, weighted with meanings Eleanor couldn't decode. "Daniel joined the firm 3 years after I founded it," Eleanor said carefully. "He brought commercial development experience. We married 2 years later." "I see." Katerina settled into her chair, those dark eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "And the Meridian Green complex, this is your design?" "Yes." "Every detail." "Curious." Katerina opened her tablet, her fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Because I've been researching your firm quite thoroughly in preparation for this meeting, and I've found some interesting inconsistencies in how your projects are attributed." Before Eleanor could respond, Daniel swept into the room with 2 junior associates, his presence immediately dominating the space. "Mr. Whitmore, excellent to see you again." Daniel's handshake was firm, his smile calibrated for maximum warmth. "I trust you've met my wife, Eleanor. She's been working day and night on this presentation." "Working day and night on her own designs, I should think," Katerina said mildly. Daniel turned to her, and Eleanor saw him recalculate, recognizing power when he encountered it. "Dr. Volkov," he said smoothly, "your reputation precedes you. I'm honored to present to someone of your caliber." "Are you?" Katerina's smile was sharp. "Then perhaps we should begin. I'm very interested to see what the architect of the Meridian Green complex has to say." And Eleanor, watching the exchange, felt the first stirrings of something she couldn't name, a sense that this presentation was about to become something far more consequential than she'd imagined. "That's from my thesis," Eleanor heard herself say again, the words echoing in the sudden silence. "My graduate thesis at Columbia." Daniel's expression flickered, anger, quickly suppressed, replaced by that smooth, dismissive charm. "Darling, you're being emotional. We've built upon your academic work together as partners. Show me the thesis, Katerina said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. I'm sorry. Daniel's smile was beginning to fray. Mrs. Pierce's thesis. I'd like to see it. Katerina's fingers moved across her tablet. In fact, I took the liberty of accessing Columbia's architectural archive this morning. Your wife's thesis, Mr. Pierce, is titled Biomimetic Integration, Adaptive Systems for Post-Industrial Urban Renewal. It was completed in 2014 and received the Preston Award for Innovation. I've read it. Quite brilliant. Eleanor felt the blood draining from her face. No one had mentioned her thesis in years, certainly not Daniel, who'd always dismissed her academic work as theoretical compared to his real-world experience. I'm not sure what this has to do with, Daniel began. Everything in this presentation, Katerina continued, her voice pleasant but implacable, from the vertical garden irrigation systems to the solar array configuration to the fundamental philosophy of creating living buildings, all of it appears to be direct application of Mrs. Pierce's thesis, which raises the question, why is it being presented as your vision, Mr. Pierce, when the intellectual framework clearly originates with your wife? The silence that followed was suffocating. James Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. That's a serious question, Mr. Pierce. Daniel laughed, but the sound was wrong. Too loud, too forced. With all due respect, Dr. Volkov, I think you're reading too much into academic lineage. Yes, Eleanor's thesis provided a foundation, but the commercial application, the financial structuring, the actual viability of this project, that's come from my expertise. Architecture isn't just about pretty drawings. It's about making things happen in the real world. Pretty drawings, Eleanor repeated softly. Something was rising in her chest, hot and inevitable. Is that what you think my work is? Eleanor, not now.
No.
She turned to face him fully, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not now. Then when, Daniel? When were you planning to acknowledge that every major project this firm has completed was designed by me? That the clients you schmooze and the contacts you network with are interested in us because of my designs, not your sales pitch. You're making a scene, Daniel hissed. Good. Eleanor heard her voice strengthening, felt something unlocking inside her. Because I'm tired of being erased from my own life. I'm tired of reading articles about your vision, attending award ceremonies where you thank me for my support as if I'm your secretary instead of the architect who designed the buildings being honored. Mrs. Pierce, Whitmore interjected carefully, perhaps we should take a break. No, Katerina said. I think Mrs. Pierce should continue. In fact, I think we all need to see something. She stood, connecting her tablet to the presentation screen. Eleanor's design disappeared, replaced by something that made her breath stop.
It was a website.
The header read, The Invisible Architects, a database of uncredited design work. I've been compiling this for 3 years, Katerina said, her voice measured but fierce. Stories of architects, predominantly women, whose work has been systematically claimed by partners, husbands, colleagues. The pattern is always the same. The technical genius does the work, the charismatic frontman takes the credit. She clicked through pages of documentation. Names, projects, before and after attribution. Eleanor saw firms where founding female partners had slowly been written out of their own histories, watched design competitions where women's winning entries had been presented by male colleagues. You asked about my Prague project, Katerina continued, looking at Eleanor. What you may not know is that for 15 years, I worked in partnership with my husband. He was brilliant at presentations, at networking, at making clients feel comfortable. I was brilliant at architecture. Slowly, so slowly I barely noticed his name moved ahead of mine. Our firm became his firm. My designs became, our designs became his vision with my technical support. Eleanor felt tears burning behind her eyes. When we divorced, Katerina said, her voice hardening, he kept the firm name, kept the clients, kept the reputation we'd built on my work. I had to start over at 42, rebuilding a career under my maiden name while he continued to win awards for projects I designed. She turned to Daniel, and her expression was ice. So when James asked me to evaluate this project, I did more than review the architectural plans. I researched your firm's history. I found Mrs. Pierce's thesis. I tracked the evolution of her design philosophy through 10 years of work. And I found something interesting. Another click. The screen filled with a side-by-side comparison. Eleanor's thesis diagrams on the left, the Meridian Green complex designs on the right. The visual DNA was unmistakable. Every innovation in this project, Katerina said, traces directly back to Mrs. Pierce's graduate work. The irrigation systems? Figure 3.4 of her thesis. The solar array configuration? Chapter 7. Even the community integration philosophy? Her undergraduate honors project from 2009. She pulled up more documents. Eleanor recognized them with a jolt. Her early sketches, design journals she'd kept, presentations from the first 3 years of the firm's existence. All of them bearing her name alone. And yet, Katerina continued, in the past 5 years, Mr. Pierce's name has moved steadily forward in attribution. Articles that once cited Eleanor Hartwell Pierce now reference Pierce and Associates or simply Daniel Pierce. Awards that once acknowledged joint work now credit his vision and leadership. This is absurd, Daniel said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Eleanor is my wife. We're partners. She's always been acknowledged. As your supporter, your team, your technical expert. Katerina's voice was sharp. Never as the architect she is. Tell me, Mr. Pierce, when was the last time you told a journalist that your wife was the design genius and you handled business development? When did you last defer to her expertise in a presentation? When did you last ensure she received solo credit for her own work? Daniel's jaw worked soundlessly. Eleanor felt the room spinning. She thought of every time Daniel had spoken over her, every client meeting where he'd positioned himself as the creative force, every decision about her firm that he'd made without consulting her. She remembered the slow, steady erosion of her identity, so gradual she'd barely noticed until she'd become a supporting character in the story of her own life. I have an email, Katerina said quietly, pulling up her screen. Sent 3 weeks ago from your office manager, Mr. Pierce, to my assistant. You wrote, Eleanor is brilliant with the technical work, but she can be insecure about presentations. I'll handle the client-facing aspects. She's more comfortable in a support role. Eleanor felt the blood draining from her face. You wrote that. I was trying to make sure the presentation went smoothly, Daniel said defensively. You know you get nervous. I get nervous, Eleanor said slowly, because you've spent 7 years undermining my confidence. Because you've convinced me that I'm not capable of presenting my own work. Because you've slowly, systematically erased me from my own firm. That's not, Daniel started. Hartwell Pierce Design, Eleanor interrupted. That was the firm's name. My name first. When did it become Pierce and Associates? Show me the legal documents where I agreed to that change. The silence was deafening. You changed it without telling me, Eleanor said, the realization crashing over her like cold water. Last year, when I was hospitalized for exhaustion, you changed the firm's legal name. It was just paperwork, Daniel said weakly. A formality. I thought. You thought you could erase my name from my own company while I was too sick to notice. Eleanor's voice was shaking now, but not with fear. With rage. How long have you been planning this? How long have you been positioning yourself to take over completely? Mrs. Pierce, James Whitmore said, standing. I think we've seen enough. Eleanor's heart plummeted. Of course. She'd just had an emotional breakdown in front of the most important client her firm had ever pursued. She'd torpedoed the Meridian Green complex, destroyed her professional reputation, all because she couldn't keep her composure for one crucial presentation. But Whitmore was looking at Daniel, not her. Mr. Pierce, he said, his voice cold. Consolidated Global Properties takes integrity very seriously. The misrepresentation of creative credit is, in our view, a form of fraud. We cannot in good conscience do business with someone who has systematically claimed his wife's work as his own. Now wait just a minute. Daniel stood, his face flushing red. However, Whitmore continued, turning to Eleanor, We would be very interested in working with the actual architect of the Meridian Green complex. Mrs. Pierce, if you're willing to proceed without your husband's involvement, we'd like to move forward with this project under your sole direction." Eleanor couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was hearing. "I second that proposal," Katerina said, a fierce smile on her face. "And I'd like to suggest that Consolidated Global engage Mrs. Pierce as lead architect on 3 additional projects currently in development, without Mr. Pierce's participation in any capacity." The Tribeca loft felt different when Eleanor returned that evening, smaller, somehow, and less impressive. Or perhaps she was seeing it clearly for the first time. Daniel's aesthetic vision, Daniel's furniture, Daniel's carefully curated life with her as a decorative element. He was waiting in the living room, a glass of scotch in his hand. "You destroyed everything," he said without preamble. 11 years of work, gone because you couldn't control yourself for one meeting. Eleanor set down her briefcase, full of her design documents that she'd spent the afternoon reclaiming from the office.
No, Daniel.
"You destroyed everything by stealing my work and lying about it for 7 years. "Stealing?" He laughed bitterly. "We're married, Eleanor. Married people share their work. I built this firm's reputation, made the connections, brought in the clients. On my talent, using my designs." Eleanor felt the clarity that had crystallized during the long walk home. "I've been reviewing our financials. Did you know that every major contract we've won was because the client specifically requested my design work? The Lexington Tower project? They'd seen my portfolio from before we married. The Brooklyn Commons development? They wanted the architect who designed that sustainable housing complex in Red Hook, my project, Daniel, the one I finished the month before you joined the firm. I helped with those projects. You networked. You schmoozed. You played golf with developers while I worked 90-hour weeks designing the buildings that made our reputation." Eleanor felt herself standing taller, stronger. "And slowly, you convinced everyone, including me, that your contribution was equal to mine. That your business development was as valuable as my architecture. That the firm's success was our success, when the truth is that I was the engine and you were just the hood ornament." Daniel's face had gone red. "You ungrateful. I made you, Eleanor. When I met you, you were a nobody fresh out of grad school with some impractical ideas about green buildings. I taught you how this business works. I introduced you to real clients. I gave you legitimacy. You met me," Eleanor said carefully, "when I just won a national design competition and received 2 job offers from major firms. I chose to start my own practice instead. You convinced me to bring you on as a partner because you were charming and confident, and I was young enough to believe that my technical brilliance needed your social polish to succeed." She walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Buildings designed by architects whose names were known, whose visions were celebrated. "I've spent the past 6 hours with my lawyer," Eleanor continued, "reviewing the firm's partnership agreement, the legal name change, the trademark filings. Want to know what I discovered?" Daniel said nothing, but his grip on the glass had tightened. "You forged my signature," Eleanor said quietly. "On the legal documents, changing the firm name from Hartwell Pierce Design to Pierce and Associates. You did it while I was in the hospital, like I said. But you also transferred several of our key client contracts into your name only. You moved intellectual property rights for 3 of my design patents into a personal holding company. You've been systematically stealing my firm for over a year. Those were just legal restructurings. That's fraud, Daniel." Eleanor turned to face him. "Corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, forgery. My lawyer estimates you've diverted approximately $1.2 million in revenue that should have come to me as the primary designer and original founder." Daniel's face had gone white. "So here's what's going to happen," Eleanor said, and her voice was steel. "You're going to sign documents returning full ownership of Hartwell Pierce Design to me. You're going to publicly acknowledge that you misrepresented your role in the firm's projects. You're going to transfer back every patent, every trademark, every contract you stole. And you're going to do it quietly, without contest, because if you don't, I will file criminal charges and destroy you." "You can't prove any of this," Daniel said, but his voice wavered. Eleanor pulled out her phone, pressing play on a recording. Daniel's voice filled the room. Eleanor is brilliant with the technical work, but she can be insecure about presentations. I'll handle the client-facing aspects. She's more comfortable in a support role. Another recording. Look, between us, my wife is the talent, but I'm the businessman. She designs, I make it profitable. That's how this works. A third. Eleanor doesn't need to be in this meeting. I can speak for both of us. She gets overwhelmed by the business side. Marcus has been documenting everything, Eleanor said, referring to their analyst. Every time you dismissed my contributions, every time you took solo credit for joint work, every time you spoke about me like I was your employee instead of your partner. He came to me 3 months ago, worried about what you were doing to the firm.
To me.
Marcus. Daniel spat the name. That little weasel was spying for you? No, Daniel. He was protecting the architect whose work he actually respected. Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude for Marcus, who'd sat with her that afternoon, helping her reconstruct the paper trail of Daniel's betrayals. He's prepared to testify about your misrepresentations if this goes to court. So is our accountant, our office manager, and 3 former clients who specifically remember requesting my design work and being told by you that it was your vision. Daniel stood abruptly, the scotch sloshing in his glass. You're going to regret this, Eleanor. You think you can run this firm without me? You're nothing without my connections, my reputation. Your reputation built on my work, Eleanor corrected. And yes, I think I can run my firm without you. In fact, I signed contracts this afternoon for 4 major projects, 3 with Consolidated Global Properties and 1 with the city's sustainability initiative. All of them specifically requesting Eleanor Hartwell Pierce as lead architect. Not Pierce and Associates. Not Daniel Pierce. Me. She watched the realization crash over him, the understanding that his carefully constructed edifice of credit and reputation had been built on sand, that without her talent, he was just another middling businessman with a good golf swing. I've arranged for movers to come tomorrow, Eleanor continued. They'll pack your belongings. You'll be staying at the W Hotel until you find permanent accommodation. I'll have divorce papers drawn up by the end of the week. Eleanor, for the first time, Daniel's voice cracked with something that might have been genuine emotion. We can fix this. We've been together 11 years. That has to count for something. Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but tired sadness for the years she'd wasted believing his version of their story. It counted for something, she said quietly. It counted for me learning that I'm stronger than I knew. That my work has value independent of your validation. That I don't need someone to speak for me when I have my own voice. She walked past him toward the bedroom, pausing at the doorway. The firm's lawyer will contact you tomorrow with the documents. Sign them, Daniel. Because if you fight this, I will take everything. I'll expose every lie, every theft, every manipulation. I'll make sure everyone in this industry knows exactly who designed those buildings. And I'll make sure they know who tried to steal the credit. You've changed, Daniel said bitterly. You used to be sweet, grateful. Now you're just an architect, Eleanor finished. I used to be your wife who happened to design buildings. Now I'm an architect who happened to be married to you. And frankly, I'm looking forward to the happened becoming past tense. 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the same conference room overlooking Manhattan, but everything was different. The nameplate on the wall read Hartwell Design Studio in clean, architectural letters. No Pierce, no Associates, just her name, the way it should have been from the beginning. Katerina sat across from her, reviewing the latest design iterations for the Meridian Green complex. They'd become genuine friends over the past months, their shared experiences creating a bond that transcended professional collaboration. This is even better than the original proposal, Katerina said, tracing the updated solar array configuration. You've solved the southern exposure problem beautifully. I could think more clearly, Eleanor admitted, once I stopped waiting for someone to tell me my ideas weren't good enough. Marcus appeared in the doorway, carrying coffee and looking pleased with himself. Eleanor had made him a partner in the restructured firm, a decision that had raised eyebrows but felt absolutely right. His business acumen and her design vision formed a genuine partnership, one built on mutual respect rather than extraction. "You're going to want to see this," he said, pulling up an article on the projection screen. It was from Architecture Today, one of the industry's most prestigious publications. The headline read, "Eleanor Hartwell Reclaims Her Legacy: How One Architect Exposed Design Credit Theft." The article featured photos of Eleanor's work spanning a decade, her early projects, her thesis designs, detailed comparisons showing the clear evolution of her unique architectural philosophy. It discussed the broader pattern Katerina had been documenting, cited statistics about how women architects were systematically undercredited, and positioned Eleanor as a whistleblower who'd exposed an industry-wide problem. There was one paragraph about Daniel, buried near the end. Daniel Pierce, formerly Eleanor Hartwell's business partner and husband, settled allegations of intellectual property theft out of court in September. He has since resigned from several professional organizations and is no longer practicing architecture in New York. Multiple former clients have come forward to clarify that projects attributed to Pierce were in fact designed by Hartwell. "He's finished," Marcus observed, not without satisfaction. "No," Eleanor said quietly. "He finished himself. I just stopped letting him use my work as a shield." Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Linda Chen from the Preston Fellowship Committee. We're selecting next year's fellows and wondered if you'd consider serving as a mentor. We need more women showing the next generation that they can claim their own success." Eleanor smiled. The Preston Award, the one her thesis had won 11 years ago, the one that had first made her believe she might actually have a future in architecture. Coming full circle. "Yes," she typed back. "I'd be honored." Another buzz. This one from James Whitmore. City Planning Board approved the Meridian Green Complex. Groundbreaking scheduled for March.
They want you to speak at the ceremony.
About time people heard from the actual architect. Katerina looked up from the designs, something knowing in her dark eyes. "How does it feel?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, she would have said it felt terrifying. The exposure, the conflict, the dissolution of her marriage and restructuring of her firm. The vulnerability of standing alone, without someone else's confidence to hide behind.
But now?
"It feels like finally living in a building I designed," Eleanor said. "Instead of one someone else told me I should want."
Her phone rang.
An LA number she didn't recognize. "Eleanor Hartwell?" The voice was young, female, urgent. "My name is Jade Morrison. I'm an architect at Richardson & Cole in Los Angeles. I just read your article, and I think I'm going through what you went through. My senior partner has been presenting my work as his, and I don't know what to do." Eleanor looked at Katerina, who nodded encouragingly. "Tell me everything," Eleanor said, "and then let's talk about what your options are." As she listened to Jade's story, so painfully familiar, the same patterns of erasure and appropriation, Eleanor felt something settling into place. This wasn't just about her firm anymore, or her projects, or her career. It was about building something larger. A practice of acknowledgement, a commitment to visibility, a refusal to let talented people be erased by those who'd learned to profit from their silence. 6 months after that, Eleanor stood on a construction site in Brooklyn, hard hat protecting her head from the November wind. Around her, the skeleton of the Meridian Green Complex was rising, steel bones that would one day hold her vision of vertical gardens and solar arrays and community spaces designed for actual humans to actually live in. James Whitmore stood beside her, equally hard-hatted, looking pleased. "The city is thrilled," he said. "You're already over budget on the public enthusiasm metrics. They want to fast-track your proposal for the Queensboro development." "I'll need to hire more staff," Eleanor said, mentally calculating the structural requirements for a project that size. "And I want to make sure we're hiring from diverse pools. Not just gender diversity, racial, economic, educational background diversity. I want architects who haven't had traditional access to these opportunities." "It's your firm," Whitmore observed. "You can build whatever culture you want." Your firm. The word still gave Eleanor a small thrill of ownership, of authenticity, of hard-won truth. She thought about Daniel occasionally, couldn't help it, given how intertwined their lives had been. She'd heard through the industry grapevine that he'd moved to Seattle, was working in commercial real estate sales. Not architecture. Not using anyone else's designs to build his reputation. She didn't hate him, she'd realized. She just felt neutral. Like he was a chapter she'd finished, lessons learned, time to move forward. Her phone buzzed. A message from Katerina. Prague next month? Want you to see the new archive space. Plus there are 3 young architects here who need to meet you. Eleanor smiled, typing back her acceptance. The wind picked up, carrying the sounds of construction, hammering, welding, the organized chaos of a building becoming itself. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the cold air on her face, and thought about foundations. She'd learned something crucial over these months of rebuilding. That the most important foundation wasn't steel or concrete, but truth. That a life built on someone else's story would always be unstable, no matter how carefully constructed. That the scariest thing she'd ever done, standing in that conference room and claiming her own work, had also been the most essential. That there were 2 ways to build a legacy: on borrowed glory that would eventually crumble, or on the solid ground of your own, authentic work. Eleanor opened her eyes, looking up at the building rising around her. Her building. Her vision. Her name on the plans. And for the first time in 7 years, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. Behind her, Marcus called out something about the schedule. Katerina was arriving next week to review the integration systems. There were 50 emails waiting in her inbox, 3 new project proposals to consider, a keynote speech to write for a Women in Architecture conference. Her life was full and complicated and demanding and entirely, authentically hers. Eleanor pulled out her phone, opening her notes app. She typed, "Principle number 1 for young architects. Your work is yours. Your vision is yours. Your name is yours. Anyone who asks you to diminish yourself to make them more comfortable is not your partner. They're your obstacle. Build accordingly." She saved it, planning to include it in that keynote speech. Then she turned back to the construction site, her building, her future rising steel by steel into the cold November sky. Somewhere in the city, other women architects were designing buildings that would bear other people's names. Other talented people were being systematically erased by partners who'd learned that taking credit was easier than earning it. But Eleanor was no longer one of them. She was an architect. She was building. And finally, mercifully, undeniably, she was building her own life with her own hands. The wind gusted again, and Eleanor smiled into it, feeling strong. The Meridian Green complex broke ground in March and was completed 18 months later. It won 3 international architecture awards and was featured in every major design publication. Every article, every award, every recognition bore one name: Eleanor Hartwell. Hartwell Design Studio expanded to include 12 architects, with a mentorship program specifically designed to support women and minorities entering the profession. The firm's stated mission included a commitment to visible, acknowledged collaboration. Every project credited every contributor, from senior architects to junior drafters. Dr. Katerina Volkov's database of uncredited design work grew into a nonprofit organization, helping architects reclaim stolen credit and exposing systematic patterns of professional theft. Daniel Pierce faded from the industry's collective memory, not dramatically, but with the quiet erasure he'd once inflicted on others. And Eleanor? She kept building, kept designing, kept standing in construction sites with the wind in her face and her name on the plans. Kept, finally, living in a space she designed for herself. Some structures are made of steel and glass. Others are made of truth and courage. Eleanor had learned to build both.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.